And it's time again for Anderson Medicine with your host, myself, Dr. Steve Fagans. I got a little bit of a cold this week. I got an upper respiratory infection, so my voice is different. But I have already taken the only evidence-based medicine for a viral upper respiratory infection, which would be chicken soup. And you are really into a big treat. This is going to be great fun. Our guest this week is Major General retired, Randy Randolph, who has done pretty much every job that you can in the Air Force and then in civilian medicine, and we'll get into that. We'll start with a little bit of a story. You know, in the wake of the Vietnam War, in which doctors were there because they were drafted, and they rarely stayed in, the medical corps was just decimated. Very difficult to get doctors to stay in to keep. And so Congress enacted the Health Professions Medical Scholarship, the HPSP, the Health Professions Scholarship. And Dr. Randolph was one of the first recipients. I myself received an HPSP scholarship and went to the Air Force in 1970 while attending medical school. Later, in September of 2003, he retired as a Major General. That's 2 stars for you and me after doing a number of things. And so, Dr. Randolph, I just want to say welcome. You've got like this longest CV ever, and we'll kind of highlight a number of things as we go along. But I just want to say welcome to Anderson Medicine. I'll read a couple of things here, and then maybe we'll just start talking.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. This has been a highlight. I've been looking forward to this from the moment that you asked me to come. And all those things that you mentioned, and HPSP, what that really means is that I'm old. I've been around a long time. And in fact, I was thinking since our conversation that I began this association with the Air Force before the HPSP program started. It was then called the Medical Education Program. So it was similar, but it was more comprehensive. And as HPSP students began, they had a certain payback. And if they went into residency, that added to the payback. In my program, you actually got to pay back the education piece while you were doing the residency. So by the time I finished all my training, I really only had about 2 years left that I had to do.
Really?
Very different than it is today.
So for me in the mid-90s, you know, the payback was year for year, and any postgraduate work that you did, that just added and prolonged the payback. Yeah. But, you know, this scholarship program has, I think, resulted in our nation's best physicians, many of whom had military service, many of whom researchers, and Bethesda National Naval, and Balboa, and San Antonio. Those places, the physicians, I think, who came through there, they run companies now. They are amongst our physician leaders, would you?
Oh, I would agree with that. In fact, Dr. Fagans, let me just say this, that most people are not aware of what you just said. And a lot of our audience, in fact, if they're medical people, they tend to look at medicine and the services as maybe a step down. Can these guys really get a job? That kind of thing. But in point of fact, what you've just said is correct. There are a great number of leaders that leave our services that go on to lead in their civilian life, and they do very, very well. And if you even go backward and think about some of the early writing that was done, the original war surgery books, those books that we still practice from, were written back in the times when we were trying to figure out how to take care of people on battlefields. So there's quite a legacy when you think about military medicine that we brought forward for the rest of the world.
So I want to read some of your background. A Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Marietta College, a Master's of Science in Microbiology from Howard University, his medical degree from Meharry Medical College, and graduated something called Alpha Omega Alpha, which is the Medical Honor Society, the top 10%. I'm only going to have AOA people on this show.
Oh, that's good.
He's a general surgery residency at Keesler Air Force Base, and most of us who went through the scholarship did do military residencies. I would consider military residencies kind of a notch above as well. Would you say?
Well, let me just say this, that when I did my general surgical residency, I wasn't confined to general surgery, as you kind of were in most civilian programs. If you were in vascular surgery, I mean, that's what you did day in and day out. As a general surgeon, I got to work with excellent orthopedists. I got to even get involved in a great number of chest surgical cases, and I got to do a great number of peripheral vascular procedures and I got to take care of these people after in postoperative care and other preoperative workups, which residencies weren't quite like that. So in the civilian world. So when we left the military and went to our civilian jobs, those of us who did that, we were very well prepared for just about anything that came down the pike. And another thing that we did, and I think other residents would have done a great deal of this too, really, but we took care of our patients stem to stern. So if a patient had a medical condition, say diabetes or significant hypertension, high blood pressure, we kind of needed to know how to take care of that too. We always called our medical colleagues as surgeons, but we were expected to know a fair amount about that ourselves too. So I'm biased just like you are, but I would agree. I think that it was a notch above, and we got a chance to do things I might not have gotten to do in a residency in a pure fashion had I done it in the civilian sector.
And so moving on, Dr. Randolph is board certified in general surgery and remains board certified, as well as board certified in medical management. And so you went on to be a flight surgeon. In fact, I read here, the chief flight surgeon, the one with the star on the top of the wings, like the coveted thing that everyone wanted. When did you do that?
Well, actually, that's an interesting story, because in the older days, if you decided to do a residency, you were going to be ineligible to do the flight medicine training program. And just about as I came along, they started loosening those rules because they realized that didn't make a lot of sense. Here we have a doctor who's in a flying service who doesn't get to know and treat flight surgical things, and they changed it. So I was a beneficiary of that. I've just been blessed. I really have been. And so I got an opportunity to do flight medicine. I was stationed at Austin, Texas, at a place called Bergstrom Air Force Base doing general surgery. And the flight medicine course was in San Antonio. So it's right down the road, 60, 70 miles. And I got an opportunity to make that trip just about once or twice a week, because they had housing for us down there, and I was housed on the base up there. And we got to go back and forth. But I think that when I think about military medicine and aerospace medicine, and those were specialties in and of themselves. And it really didn't have a lot to do with the diseases or conditions that one treated. It had more to do with a person, meaning a physician, who was occupying a seat in an airplane and who was experiencing what that pilot is experiencing. The pilot can tell you about that, and you have to sort of figure out what they're, but if you're in the middle of doing it with them, you understand when they say, we were pulling a lot of G's and I just kind of lost my right eye. And you know exactly what they're talking about because it happened to you too. So you had a perspective for that no one else did. And it always stood you in good stead with the pilots when you could talk their business as well as try to teach them a little bit of yours, I think. So it was really great.
So your flight surgery experience of a pilot's was a lot more friendlier than
Yeah. A lot of them like to keep you away.
Oh, very much so. And so because the flight surgeon's not exactly a real member of the team.
Yeah.
Well,
we ought to tell people why that is.
Yeah.
That's because the flight surgeon had the power to ground the pilot. Then
Right.
the pilot couldn't fly, so they didn't really want you around sometimes.
Yeah. So you go in the officer lounge or whatever, and the pilots are over here, and the docs are over there.
Right.
And frankly, the pilots are really, and you develop a real appreciation for what it is to be a pilot. That is a real,
You do.
especially in the military.
You do.
And so Dr. Randolph wasn't just happy to just be a doc. He had to be a leader and continue to move up to the ranks. And ultimately, as we said, 2 stars as a general. But he commanded hospitals at George Air Force Base, the medical center at Travis Air Force Base, and he was acting commander at Wright-Patterson. And I thought when I was there, but it turns out it was a little earlier than when I was there.
I told you I'm old.
Well, but among other things, you were the command surgeon for Air Force Medicine for Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Yeah.
And where were you? Where were you located? And what did you do?
It's pretty interesting. The story is going to take too much time. But I will say this, that there was one medic in the theater when Operation Desert Shield started, and that was just before the actual war called Desert Storm. We were there for several months, in this thing called Operation Desert Shield is we were preparing for what might be war. There was only one physician there. It was an Air Force flight surgeon. So I was the second medical person in the theater, period. And I actually came over with a whole group of airplane maintainers. I mean, there was no medicine. It was just 2 doctors, and now all these airplanes are starting to come in and so forth. And we built that up to having 15 different hospitals in the theater located throughout Saudi Arabia. Didn't have any in Kuwait because we hadn't taken that back yet. But we did have them in Bahrain. We did have them in Abu Dhabi. I mean, we had them literally all over that peninsula. So when you ask where was I was everywhere. And this is cool. This is cool because they gave me my own jet.
Really?
Yeah, my own jet. They had a little camel on it. I called it the Sopwith Camel, and I also called it the Desert Camel. That was my airplane. So I got to visit all these places. Of course, the purpose was to make sure they were ready and that they heard what I was hearing directly from General Horner, who was running the air war. So as you can imagine, communication's tough. So having people out and about to tell the real story of here's where we are, this is what we're doing, this is what to expect, meant a lot, particularly to medics who had to anticipate things that could happen and yet be ready if they didn't to move on. So it was a special, special time. Probably the highlight of my career. It's funny, as a military medic, you train to do this job of taking care of the ill and the injured, but you hope you never have to. So we had to. And so to some extent, it was a culmination of all that training. And on the other side of it, there's this sadness about having to take care of human beings who are broken.
You know, every time this nation goes to war, one of the consequences is we learn more about medicine. We actually advance, you know, almost at a faster rate than any other time in medicine. Were there some unique things in this particular fight that we learned?
Well, I think one of the things you hear still a fair amount about is biological warfare. Though we're used to treating, as doctors, we're used to treating diseases, particularly those that we know. We also do fairly well, if we can, with some things we don't know. Well, when it came to things like biological warfare, that was something not only could we not prepare for well, but no one in leadership wanted to talk about that. And the reason was it was going to be so difficult to defend against. I mean, how do you isolate whole aircraft, whole airfields? And if you do that, how do you move casualties? It was just a really interesting time. And I do remember having to brief my boss, my 4-star, that you have to get over it. You got to start talking about it, because the minute something happens, you're totally unprepared. That's the antithesis of everything else we've done. Chemical warfare, we actually were ready for that. But biological warfare, it took convincing all the way up to Washington to get people to start making some of the advances that we needed to for that. But another thing I learned, regardless of how you feel about something, you always check. And the deal was, as the command surgeon, who was in charge of all of the medical things for a period of time there, Army, Navy, and Air Force, I had the ability to move hospital ships and all that. So something big is going on in this part of the theater, and I decided to move the hospital ship. Well, I didn't tell any of the 4-stars that, but I found out how quickly they link with the White House. And the next thing I knew, the president was talking about this hospital ship moving on TV, which we could see because we got TV back there. And I got an almost immediate call from my boss who was saying, we're moving a hospital ship? So I learned early on about chain of command and how devastating it can be if you don't follow it, even if you think you're doing the right thing. It was funny, but it worked out well.
Was this the first conflict that the critical care air transport was used?
No, it was the first one where it was recognized as such, critical air transport. We call them CCATs, by the way. That started earlier for little skirmishes here and there, and it was exercised a lot. But the way it was called a coronet bandage then, so it was a little bandage that you were putting over things, and it consisted primarily of flight surgeons and flight nurses, as did a lot of things following that. So when we first started our CCAT teams, they started out as those coronet bandages. They became smaller as we developed what we called air transportable hospitals. I mean, whole hospitals. I'd love to share that with you sometime. Sitting out in the desert. Our orthopedic surgeons wouldn't do surgery at first because we were out there in the desert, and we had to convince them, no, this is cleaner probably than it is back home and so forth. But it started with these flight surgeons and these flight nurses going out and doing whatever they could, particularly to get casualties back beyond the FEBA, the forward edge of the battle, to getting them back into a safe place. The CCATs now are very well established, and here's a little fact. Right here in our own Cincinnati, at the University of Cincinnati, we train CCAT teams. You may not have known that, but that's one of, I think, maybe now 3. There were only 2 places, one in Baltimore and one in here, but I think there's one now in Houston, Texas that also, I think it is Houston, Texas, that trains flight medical teams, CCAT teams, if you will, for ultimate operations.
And that's Jay Johanneman, who is actually a member of the Anderson medical staff. If you're just joining us, you're joining a good one. This is Anderson Medicine, where we talk about behind the scenes in Anderson Township, as well as national and even international topics of medical discussion. And we're with Major General Dr. Surgeon Randy Randolph talking about a number of things. So if it's possible to move up from Command Surgeon of Desert Storm, you did. And that's to the Pentagon. I guess the Pentagon's up.
It depends on the point of view, doesn't it?
And so as Deputy Surgeon General for the Air Force, Dr. Randolph was Chief Operating Officer and was part of taking what you learned and creating a healthcare system, which became TRICARE.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was very interesting. It was the first time that the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, all of the uniformed services, including public health, sat at one table and tried to determine how do we best take care of people regardless of where they are. And it became pretty obvious that as robust as we were in those days, military medicine couldn't do it all. They needed civilian sector healthcare providers to help. We called that our wraparound or umbrella back then. So we developed these contracts with different contractors like Anthem and so forth to involve in one system care within both the civilian sector and the military sector. When something couldn't be taken care of within the military sector, we had this umbrella, if you will, of TRICARE that would allow us to do that in the civilian sector. The ultimate of that is yours truly now, who's now retired and now Medicare eligible. So I use a thing called TRICARE for Life. And I remember actually convincing Senate staffers that this was something they needed to put into law. And when I saw them writing it down, I said, you know what, I think it's going to happen, and it did. So now, when I'm seen for something, like I just had my eyes done, when I'm seen for something, that procedures bill goes directly to Medicare, as it would anyway, but I don't have to buy Medicare supplements and all that because anything Medicare doesn't take care of, it goes to TRICARE for Life and the rest is covered. And literally, zero comes out of my pocket. It's the best insurance program in the country. So it started back then. It started as 10 different regions, now down to 3 essentially, and continues to move on. There was a lot of contention about it at first, particularly from military medics who were afraid that their jobs would be overtaken in a sense. But over time, I think we found that no, it really is the complement that it was supposed to be.
So you think that'll spread to the, so we now have a Veterans Administration Secretary who has the local ties,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald, who attempting to use some Procter & Gamble style business savvy to turn around one of the great bureaucracies of the world. Will that work?
I think if he can just stand his ground, it will. That is true. It's a bureaucracy, it's a tradition, and it's culture, and he's got to overcome all of that with a foreign culture, quite frankly, business culture. But it just happens, in my opinion, that that's exactly what that part of our system needs. It needs some of the discipline of business from a civilian sector to help it through what it's going through today. And what we're hearing about is just the Veterans Administration hospital things. The Veterans Administration is huge. And we here in this city, we just formed a TriState Veterans Community Alliance. And that alliance, I happen to chair that board. And it happens to be an alliance that is meant to help veterans and their families. It's an independent 501c that is trying to help the veteran determine what they need and to get it without going to 7 different places to try to find it. So we capture the veteran's name wherever they come into our system. So it becomes a part of a colloquium, if you will. And then we're able to direct and help that veteran find whatever it is they might need while they're sitting in one place. They don't have to go hither and yon to find, they don't have to guess what's next. We have all of the contacts as members of our task force who help do that. So we did that because Easter Seals started a program that showed that there were wide gaps between what veterans needed, what was available, and what the veteran knew about what was available. So we're hoping to tie that together so that they all come together and get the veteran what they need as quickly as they need it, wherever they need it.
Can you mention that name one more time so that people, what that is, and it's locally, it's Cincinnati?
Yes, it's local. It's the TriState Veterans Community Alliance. It is local, but there's a great deal of interest. Mr. McDonald's aware of it, by the way. If this, let's call it an experiment. If this experiment works, I fully expect that this will be duplicated in other cities around because we have found that we're the only ones doing this so far. But we know that the need is national.
You know, for years it seems like the veterans were not necessarily ignored, but just kind of under the radar. And in the recent years, you see a lot of TV commercials. You see a lot of stuff, either for veterans or to help veterans. There's a lot of people. Are they really helping? Are they being opportunistic, or is there something in between?
Well, as always, there's probably a little of both going on. But I think by and large that the people who are trying to help veterans are doing the right thing. I also believe they're doing the right thing for the right reasons. It's amazing to think how large the need is for veterans. You have homeless veterans, and a lot of people, when they think veterans, they think of the Vietnam veteran and homelessness and maybe drug dependence issues and all those kinds of things. And there is that, and there's need there. But there's also you and me. You know, we become veterans, and we're not in that same situation, but we still have needs. Where do we go to find that kind of help? So we're trying to tie a program together that can go from folks who left pretty high positions in the military, middle positions in the military, lower positions in the military, and ended up in the civilian sector in different ways, but all have basic education needs, hospitalization needs, home needs. I mean, there are 4 or 5 basic things that they all need. And I think that the people that are right here in Cincinnati, I would say that the number of institutions that help the veteran are numerous and very adequate. What's missing here is the ability to tie them together so they all know about one another and so that the helpers and the veterans know about each one. So I think it's all being done with a good heart.
You know, companies look for military officers, Procter & Gamble's of the world, that they look for that type of training. I personally feel like the best management training in the world is in fact the military officer training. So when you left in 2003, you entered the civilian healthcare world at a high level, a couple years at Catholic Healthcare West, and then I think 2006, 2005, became the chief medical officer for Mercy Health. And really, you know, elevated the status of physicians and organized physician leadership. What'd you do?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that comment. What I did was have a lot of fun working with people like you. That's what I did. I think if I played one role that I would love to be a part of any legacy, it's that I helped the physicians to understand how important it is that they're a part of the solutions of the things that we're doing now. The old days of doctors and nurses are here and administration is there, and it wasn't good then. It's suicidal today. There's too much going on. There are too many needs, and we're the ones who are supposed to be fixing it. And so you need a representative from each part of our functions talking about a given issue to get a full picture and a full solution. So that was my aim. And you're one of my treasured individuals who took the time to think about being what I call a vice president for medical affairs or a chief medical officer, where you indeed were a part of that leadership team every day, every hour of every day, and not every so often. And by doing that, you were able to carry messages to the medical staff who really needed to know about it. Because once a medical staff knows something and believes it, they change it, they make it right. And at the same time, you could take clinical issues, doctor issues, to the administration. And you could say, I understand, that sounds right from that point of view, but here's how a clinician will look at that. How do we fix that? That's what I would like to leave behind is you're part of the team, you're a leader in the team, and you need to be involved in the team.
And you definitely accomplished that. So a couple of final questions. Do you have a call sign?
Yep.
What was your call sign?
It was Bones.
Really?
Yep. Now you ought to know Bones.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Trekker. And so the doc on Star Trek was Bones, and it's written on all my stuff. I've even got it on this pen.
Do you really?
Yeah.
So you had a as a general, you still have your coin that you give out.
I do.
And so that's a big deal. So
you have one.
I will give one. So we'll kind of.
You have one.
I do have one. That's
Yeah,
true.
okay,
Yeah, I
okay,
definitely
okay.
have one.
If not, I've got one for you.
So we'll wind down, and so Dr. Randolph will definitely be back, and we've done a number of things, including honor flight, TriState honor flight. He's currently the chief executive officer at Venus Caduceus, so he continues to speak nationally and internationally. And so, Dr. Randolph, just another pleasure to talk with you, to chat with you. Every time I sit with you, I learn something, or at least I get inspired. And so we'll end with some news of the week. And a big part of our news is that there are about 3,000 hospitals in the country. And every one of those hospitals has a goal to be a top 100. What used to be called Reuters, but is now called Truven Health Analytics, top 100 hospital in the nation. Every year it comes out. This past week, it came out this week. And typically there's about 3 or 4 Cincinnati hospitals that make that list. This year there's just one, Mercy Anderson Hospital.
Yep.
For the 11th time. Our local hospital, which is a lot bigger than you may think anymore, is a top 100. There was one other Ohio hospital that's been 11 times the top 100, Kettering Medical Center in Dayton. There are 3 Ohio hospitals that were also awarded something called the Everest Award, which is for the most rapid and the highest improvement over 5 years. 2 in Columbus and 1 in Cincinnati, Mercy Anderson Hospital.
Oh, congratulations.
So, once again, we're proud of our local hospital. You had some surgery, and what hospital did you choose for your cataract?
I chose Mercy Anderson. And what's interesting is that my doctor, who's not a Mercy Anderson doctor anymore because of all the stuff that's going on, he still uses Mercy Anderson to do his surgery.
Yeah. Well, Randy, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us once again for Anderson Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Fagans.